Okay, I'm going to run through the typical presentation that I give for the requested budgets. So this is for next year's budget, where we're coming in, and the expense increase is 3.93%, and the taxpayer increase at 5.48%. If you recall, the target had been 4%, so we're coming in a little bit under the target. Just for some context, kind of large picture stuff, we did spend some time fine-tuning interdistrict expenditures. We had some conversation about that, about transportation at the Finance Committee meeting. We are starting a major project, the windows and sidings, and we're phasing that in. This will be phase 1 this summer that's going into this year's budget. This is the last year of the current teacher contract, and we are this year going to be negotiating, but we haven't started yet, the support staff contracts. And fortunately, we are in a position to build both the capital reserve and the fund balance, which are both in need of bolstering, but we're in a position where we're going to be able to do that in a pretty healthy way through this budget process, which is good news. This is the 10-year October enrollments for the high school. This year was 739. That's 2025, so it was October of 2025, which was the start of this year. And the enrollment is projected next year to be 704. So you can see in the past couple of years, it will be about a 52 student decline. It had built up the past 3 years. You know, you can see looking back, it had been in the 690s for a while. Some major impacts that we'll go into more detail on when we get to those cost centers, but just to kind of give you an overview, we are in phase 1 of the siding and windows project. That's going to be about $120,000 added to the budget. We will have 3 fewer teaching positions in this requested budget. It's about $300,000. We have added an ed tech position that we, actually, is this, Chris, I don't know if this is not the right district for that.
Yes,
It is? Final Haven? Is that the high school?
Oh, no, not.
No, that's not, that's incorrect information. We'll skip over 3, pretend it's not there. That's the other district. We moved 1 ed tech position to be covered in local entitlement. Our health insurance is budgeted at 10%. We don't know where that's going to come in. We don't know what the range is going to be this year. We don't know what our increase is going to be. We expect it to be high. We've budgeted 10%. Hopefully that's high enough. That's about $213,000 increase. And we've added 1.5 support staff members to the central office, an accounts receivable, and administrative assistant help for the facilities director, transportation director, assistant superintendent, and business manager. So those are some major changes on the expense side. On the revenue side, we lost quite a bit of state subsidy, almost $120,000. It's mainly due to a significant decrease in our subsidy to the towns of Rockport and Hope, and I'll explain why that happens later in the presentation. It is mostly due to numbers of students. We have a $74,000 increase in tuition payments coming to us from other SAUs, and we have an increase in the SAD share of administrative services of almost $120,000. So those things are changes on the revenue side that end up impacting the taxpayer impact.
Maria, excuse me.
Yep.
What's the reason for the increase in the SAD share of admin services?
Some of it is just salaries. Everybody's salaries are increasing, so the cost, you know, we pay 100% of the cost in the CSD, and then it's split.
Right.
So anytime anyone gets a salary increase, it costs both districts more money to pay for that. So that's part of it. And some of it is just doing a finer job splitting those services in a way that is, more precise, I guess I would say.
Splitting the division of the total cost between the two districts is more
Correct.
precise?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we go line by line. We have a budget sheet, literally, which every single line where the costs are shared, from salaries, benefits, federal taxes, all kinds of those kinds of lines. It depends on who it is. But, it's professional development. In some cases, like it's the supply lines. I mean, supply lines have their own lines. Like custodial supplies aren't all in the CSD, but but in the superintendent lines they are. So it depends on what cost center it is, but we've got a kind of a sheet that it explicitly lays out exactly what the shared costs are.
Okay.
And some things, go, transportation services go the other direction. So some things go toward the CSD and some things go toward the SAD. Rent goes toward the SAD because the SAD owns the buildings and the CSD pays them rent. A lot of administrative services go the opposite direction because most people are five-town CSD employees where SAD pays half the cost. And the way we budget for that, which is really important, Marcia asked a question at a recent board meeting about, just system administration cost as a compared to other
Yeah,
districts.
it's right in the warehouse online.
Yeah, something to remember when we're looking at the CSD system admin costs, it's for two districts. The revenue side offsets the SAD. So the CSD admin services is actually much larger in the expense side of the budget than we actually pay because we're getting $400,000 from the SAD that offsets a lot of
We
the
were
system
looking at
admin.
district-wide, it would just be the CSD number, right?
Well,
For both districts.
for both districts combined.
Yes.
Yes, but when you look at that, like per student, you'd have to actually calculate it with both districts in mind.
But isn't a lot of that increase because you're adding staff in the central office?
Some of
That's
that,
the half.
some of that increases there, so that 1.5 staff that are being added are split between the two districts.
Maria, remind me, the state subsidy is really, that formula takes into account real estate prices, basically, right?
That is
No,
part of the calculation
Valuation,
is
yeah.
the valuation, yes.
okay.
Yep. So this is our sort of longitudinal look at our increases to the budget. The expense budget is in the top row, and then the impact to taxpayer is in the bottom row. And you can see FY27, which is next year's budget, is a 3.93% increase to expenses and a 5.48 increase to taxpayers, overall increase to taxpayers. It varies town by town, which I'll get to later. And so the 10-year averages are, the expense budget average is 4.14 and the taxpayer impact is 4.4 over the past 10 years, but you can see the data there. So we've done a good job, getting expenses back down, sort of after that post-pandemic period when things were a little bit wild. So now I'm going to take you article by article, and there is that beautiful painting we saw tonight, and the other one was the first one you saw. So regular instruction is increasing by 1.1%. Teacher wage increases are budgeted at 3% at the top of the scale, plus half of our staff also gets a step increase as well. I already mentioned that health insurance is budgeted at a 10% increase. We had two one-year positions this year, a computer science position and a science position that were created last year as one-year positions. We're ending both of those, so they're not in the FY27 budget. And we're also eliminating one English position. So those are the three positions that are not being budgeted for in next year's budget that were in this year's budget.
Maria, what's the rationale with the elimination of the English position?
We're changing some things in the English department. We've had a lot of electives
Yep.
classes in the English department, a lot of them with pretty low enrollment. And we're moving toward a English 11. You guys approved that recently. And there were probably more students in those classes than in some of the electives, and there was capacity to reduce that department by one staff member without impacting, kids are still going to take English.
Yeah.
It's a requirement. So, and we had a decline in enrollment we're not going to need, and it's going to keep happening, as we've been talking about for a long time. As things go on, unless something significant changes, our enrollment's going to continue declining, which is going to mean that we're going to need to continue to keep right-sizing all the way up through our system.
What's the projected decline for next year, though?
I just had that on a
Just
slide.
had it on the slide.
I'll go back to it if you'd like me to.
Or just if you recall it.
704.
That's from 739 to 704.
Okay, thank you.
So the next cost center is special education. We have a slight decrease in that overall line of 0.8%. We are moving the multilearner language, can't remember what MLL stands for anymore, wherever Jess is. Multilingual learner. We've changed the name of that position so many times that it's hard to keep track. But we are moving that position from 50% at the high school to 10% at the high school, because we don't have students who are MLL students at the high school right now. We are moving one ed tech to local entitlement, so that relieves it from our budget lines here. And then there are just other staffing changes and salary and health insurance election changes, that the overall budget is slightly decreasing.
The question about the previous slide. With respect to the computer science position removal, does that mean that class and that program is eliminated as well?
I'm going to let Jen answer that question, not necessarily.
We are in the early phases of getting course requests, and so really that always dictates the process and really seeing where the numbers are for next year, but we've had conversations about timing. So even in our English department, we might have a course that runs the even year and another course that runs an odd year. So we might alternate when some of those courses are run, but we will not have one dedicated staff member just to computer science.
So,
We'll be teaching within applied academics.
okay, but the individual that was hired for this position had some specialty in computer science education?
The two people
Okay,
that we've had in this role since we created it 4 years ago. Had specialties in it, yeah.
and with respect to the regular science program, how is this going to impact the sort of the four essential sections of the science curriculum, the geoscience or whatever it's called, 9th grade, biology, physics, and chemistry?
Yep, so it will not impact graduation required courses. I anticipate that this will have an impact on our ability to offer multiple sections of forensics. It will not impact horticulture because it is required to run our greenhouse. So there are certain essential courses, but I would imagine that electives will have to be viewed last in determining where our course numbers lie for creating teacher schedules.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So the next cost center is the Midcoast Program Assessment. This is our contribution to the Midcoast operations, and there's a 23.1% increase there. That's just based on their budget and our share of their budget. Other instruction, which includes co-curricular and athletics, has a 5.4% increase. That's due to stipend increases. Stipend amounts increase each year along with the teacher's contract, because stipended, the amount of money devoted to stipends in each stipended position is tied to the increases in the teacher's contract. And then officials' fees have increased pretty significantly for officiating athletic events. So that's also one of the impacts on this particular cost center. Student and staff support, which is tech, library, counseling, all kinds of different things, is a 5.9% increase. And that is due to some health insurance election changes of people who are paid out of this cost center. And we also budgeted 10 extra days for each of the 5 counselors, which had been left out of the current year's budget, but it's part of their contract.
I'm sorry, Maria, could you go
Yep.
back to that? So would a librarian position be in this category?
Yep.
Is there a plan to eliminate the librarian position?
No, not in this requested budget. There is not.
Okay, thank you.
System administration is up 6.6%. Central office support staff had a salary adjustment this year that wasn't budgeted for last year. There have been some health insurance election changes. We're adding basically a half-time accounting position and then a half-time equivalent for admin support for all those positions I had mentioned earlier: facilities, transportation, assistant superintendent, and business manager. The administrator 403B was under budgeted last year, so we fixed that. And it's just a reminder that 100% of the shared costs for both districts shows up in the CSD expense line for system administration, as well as a bunch of these different cost centers. But 50% of the share cost is recovered in revenues, which you'll see when we get to the revenue side. School administration is up 6.5%. It's really based on salary and health increases. Transportation, we are adding a half-time equivalent of office support for those positions. That's like the other half. Last slide had the 2 halves, and then this is the third half, which is 1.5. And there are some increases to the route contracts. So it's a 12.2% increase in the transportation budget. Facilities has an 11.8% increase. We're doing that project that we've talked about, siding and windows. We are replacing the intercom system. That's a $160,000 expense. $80,000 will come from the local budget and $80,000 will come from the capital reserve. We're adding a lease payment for a new truck and a new tractor. We are purchasing chairs for graduation. We have some, but we always have to borrow some every year, and we're purchasing the rest of what we need to have our own supply. We're adding that half-time office support. Electricity is increasing due to tariffs. Field maintenance, because we're going for a higher level of field maintenance, had a pretty big increase. And this is just a side note. We are planning to transfer $600,000 from the capital fund balance to the capital reserve. So at the beginning, when I had said we're in a good position to increase both the fund balance and the capital reserve, this is part of that. We'll have enough money in the fund balance to transfer a nice chunk of it to the capital reserve.
Maria, is that office support person also showing up in the business office budget?
I don't think we put that in the
We
business office
talked
budget.
about it when we had the slide up, but I just didn't know if it was in the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, the halftime accounts receivable person
Yes.
is in the business office.
Okay.
I can't remember, Chris, where we had, it's kind of complicated because right now, half of the central office administrative support person does transportation support. And so that's part of the shift of the full-time person that will be supporting them. We already kind of have half of that
Okay.
that's paid for in the central office. That half is now going to be switched to supporting the business manager and the assistant superintendent. I think it's all in the central office line, though.
Okay, as long as it's not in both lines.
No,
Fine.
no. Did I do the last slide?
Sorry.
Goes for train of thought.
So facilities, yep. So this is our debt service line. our debt service is going down, not surprisingly. A little bit of that is due to the Midcoast, so our debt payment to Midcoast is going down for their building. And we also, this year, we had put $60,000 as a placeholder in case we went through the municipal bonding process for the siding and windows project, which we're not going to do. So we took that $60,000 out as well. So that basically is the 71,391 decrease in this debt service line. Typically, we can expect to see a slight decrease each year because the Midcoast is the only debt that we're carrying that falls under this line. Other expenditures, this is the board contingency. We have reduced that by $10,000. So we're budgeting it at $140,000 for next year.
And I'm sorry, Maria, was that 150? That was the first year we'd had it up that high, though, right?
Yep, it's typically has run at 50,000.
Okay.
Yep.
And what's the rationale for keeping it up higher?
The board asked me to keep it up high.
Okay. Thank you.
So this is a summary of all of the different cost centers that I just went through. The total expense budget is $19,232,026, of an increase of just over $700,000 or 3.93%. So that's the expense side of the budget. Now I'm going to take you through the revenue side of the budget. And we're going to start with revenues that come to us from sources other than taxpayers. One of those sources is parents who pay tuition to send their children to Camden Hills because they're just willing to pay tuition to send their kid here from a different school system. And we are budgeting $23,000 for that, a slight decrease from last year. District tuition students are those students who have school choice at the high school level, whose districts pay tuition. And we are budgeting a slight decrease. We do expect slightly fewer students incoming from other towns. I think that this number will continue to slightly decrease as our enrollment decreases and as enrollment at other schools decrease. So I think that this probably will keep going down a little bit. We also have tuition that's paid to us from other school districts who send students in special ed to us, and we get more money for those students based on the services they need. And that is about a $19,000 increase. We're assuming we're going to get a little less in interest payments than we got this year. And that's because interest rates have gone down a little bit, and we're trying to be a little bit conservative, not knowing what's going to happen in the economy. Our athletic and activity receipts and our rentals and our miscellaneous revenue are all staying steady. That's an estimate. Our adult ed leased space is coming in slightly higher because that's just a cost of living increase that is applied to the rental cost each year. We get revenue from the state of Maine for teachers who are national board certified, and that goes to the teachers. It reimburses us for us paying the teachers. That's a little bit less because we have one fewer teacher. Well, actually, it's 3 fewer teachers who are national board certified than we've had in the past. The admin services from the SAD, you can see there's an 8.61% increase there, or almost $120,000. State subsidy basically offsets that. And superintendent agreement subsidy, we get a subsidy each year for the superintendent agreements that we have at the high school. We're expecting that to be similar to what it was this year. It's an estimate at $40,000. And we're planning to use the same amount of the carry forward as a revenue source if we need to use it at the end of the year to help meet our expenses. We haven't had to use that for a number of years. But overall, it's a slight decrease in our revenue sources from non-assessment sources of a negative 8.41%. So, yep. So that, we have $4.841 million coming from other sources. That's right there at the top, non-assessment revenue. Then we need to make up the rest of the budget, the rest of the expense side in taxpayer revenue. And that's split into a few different categories. One is basically the required amount from the state that we have to raise, which is our adjusted local contribution. Then we have debt service from Midcoast that we have to pay. And then we have other additional local, which is the amount that we spend basically above the EPS formula and above our debt that we need to raise locally. So we need to have that $4.8 million at the top from non-assessment sources, plus the total assessments from taxpayers has to equal our expense line. So if you add those two together, you get $19,232,000. It's 27. It's just those are, if you add it up, the above columns, you're going to get 27. But it's just rounding. One of them's 26. One of them's 27. We don't put the cents on here, so those are essentially the same values.
Maria, do you mind if I ask a question on the previous
Yep.
slide, the breakdown of the revenues? So, when we're talking about the national board certifications, are those pre-fewer board certifications tied to any of the cuts in positions?
No.
No.
People
it's
have
just totally
retired.
separate. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And then one last question, which,
Yep.
you can say I can't speculate on this, take it offline, but is there, I don't know, a future in which I'm thinking about the tuition from districts? As enrollment decreases across the board, are there districts within a reasonable geographic range of us who might at some point say, look, we're not going to continue to have a high school and actually we're going to give choice and maybe they're going to send kids to Camden Hills? Or do we feel like the outer lying geographic regions where that might happen are unlikely to happen in the future?
I think it's pretty unlikely. I haven't heard about any,
Okay.
high schools that are on the brink of closing down.
But there are towns like Northport that could choose to send us
Right.
more.
Well, she's talking about schools
Yeah, I know.
that already
yeah,
have a
yeah,
high
yeah.
But we
school.
could increase them in other
I'm
ways.
just thinking about the statewide trends and,
Well-
whether we might be still in this area where we might eventually get some folks, but it sounds like.
I mean, you're talking about not the districts. We currently draw from every district that we could.
Yeah, I'm not talking
You're
about.
talking about new districts who might lose their high school that
Exactly.
would give us new sources.
Exactly.
I don't see that happening.
Okay.
The other,
Alton is
Just
thinking
say,
about
leaving
leaving
RSU.
RSU.
But that's not for the well, maybe.
That would be
for
the high school.
yeah, it actually would
Yeah.
be.
School, yeah.
The Press Herald had a really interesting article about this, and I was like, oh, I wonder if this. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
just don't know.
if towns withdraw from
That's
their
what St.
school
that's what
district,
St. George
Some
did.
are.
I mean, that's why St. George
Because the cost is too much. So, yeah, it's
I mean, honestly, it's a great deal for them to tuition to us as opposed to having, our cost is much higher than they pay us.
I see. So that's not necessarily going to solve all our ills to get more.
Well, they're absorbing a lot of our fixed costs. If they went away, we wouldn't save a lot of money.
That's true.
Yeah, and I don't know if,
Great
for a
deal
lot
for
of
us,
those
too.
towns, Northport.
Yeah.
We've recently gotten students from Damascotta, Bremen, that historically we haven't gotten students coming that far. But I don't think and like St. George, we have a lot fewer incoming ninth graders than we have in all of our other classes from St. George. As if other schools' overall populations decline,
That's
it's likely that we already get 80% of the students from St. George, but if they only have 10 students in their 8th grade class, if their populations are also declining, it's going to impact us across the board as
And
well.
that reduction in the ninth grade is probably just decrease in overall population versus they're all going to Lincoln Academy or whatever. Do we know?
Jen, do you know if it's a smaller class in St. George this 8th grade, or a lot more of them going to Lincoln Academy?
Or Oceanside for that.
Well, so
Sure.
the daughter of the principal at Oceanside is in the 8th grade class. And it really is adjusting the demographic of students going to Oceanside. which is
Really
good for
interesting.
that
Yeah,
group
good
of
for them.
Individuals that have a good social network.
Sure,
And
sure,
are
sure.
going to a similar school. But the class actually isn't smaller. It is very unique situation that we have less than 50% of the available students coming to Camden House.
My understanding from some quick conversations with people about positions recently was actually our outlying towns in St. George are pretty stable in their enrollment. So I asked the question, like, are you, as we were looking at, reducing
Right.
particular positions, are you looking at, and it was, oh, no, we're not having the declining enrollment that's occurring there right now for the K-8s locally, and St. George is one of them.
We do have an increase in Northport though, so,
Right.
there's that.
Yeah.
Double.
Yeah, I was going to say, the numbers we're talking about, though, are really small.
1 to 2
All
students.
5 of them were excited.
That's great. We'll take all 5.
Something.
It's actually big.
So-
Thank you. That was helpful.
The overall tax impact, the increase in expenses at 3.93% increase. Our non-assessment revenues are declining by 0.41%. And it all fleshes out that the overall taxpayer assessment increase is 5.48%. Below that is how it hits each of the towns. Appleton will be a 3.3% increase, Camden 7.4, Hope 7.7, Lincolnville 6.6, and Rockport 2.7. So just as a refresher, understanding how the state determines each town's share, it's based on both pupil count and valuation. So the state determines how much each town owes in the EPS formula based on the pupil count. And that's called the expected contribution, just sheer numbers. This is how many students you have, this is how much you are supposed to spend because you have this many students. Then they look at how much each town can afford to pay based on property valuation. So if your pupil count says you need to pay $350 and your valuation says you can only afford to pay $200, the state subsidy will be $150. It makes up the difference. If it says you have to pay $350 and your valuation comes back and says you can afford to pay $500, they say, well, you don't get any subsidy because you can easily afford what you have to pay. So you're called a minimum receiver. So that's basically how it works. Camden is the only town that's a minimum receiver. So all of the other towns, the formula spits out based on student count and says this is how much you need to pay, but the valuations are coming in lower, saying you actually can't afford to pay that much. So we'll make up the difference in subsidy. The other thing that is really interesting is it's not whether or not, like, Rockport's population declined by 5 students, therefore its share should be less. It's how much did Rockport's population change relative to the other 5 towns. So if Rockport declined by 5 students and Camden declined by 10 and Hope by 4 and Lincolnville by 8, Rockport actually could have the biggest increase, even though their population decreased, because it's not about the absolute value of that. It's about the relative amount that things are changing between the 5 towns. That's true for valuation and pupil count. So in Appleton, the relative change in the percentage of students was that Appleton's student, I don't tell you how much it increased or decreased, but the relative amount decreased in Appleton, but just by a hair, 0.18%. Its change in value was 15.8%. They had a small increase in the subsidy amount. The pupil count decrease was very small, and they're going to have a modest increase in their taxes. Camden population, look at Camden's population compared to all of the other 5 towns. It had a 1.44% increase. So compared to everybody else, you know, it had an increase that was twice as large as the next largest increase. That's why one of the reasons why Camden's taxes are going up a lot is because their pupil count went up a lot. And even though the valuation in Camden went up by 21.3%, Camden's valuation is well above what their expected contribution is. So they're a minimum receiver. At the end of the day, it doesn't even matter what their valuation was. It's only based on their pupil count because they can afford to pay what their pupil count says they need to pay. Hope had a slight decrease relative to the other towns in their population, but their valuation was pretty high, relatively speaking, 20.7%. They actually lost subsidy in Hope because the gap closed between what's expected. They had fewer students, so their expected contribution is less because they don't have as many kids, but their ability to pay rose. So that gap between what they were expected to pay and what their ability to pay narrowed. So they lost subsidy because they could afford more according to the formulas. Lincolnville had a increase in its relative population, and it had an increase in its valuation. So they got an increase, actually ended up getting an increase in their subsidy because of their pupil count, really, because their pupil count went up. Pupil count, tiny changes in pupil count have a pretty big impact on subsidy. And Rockport had a 1.54% decrease in student count and a pretty small increase, relatively speaking, in the valuation. So they actually had a large subsidy loss for the same reason that Hope did. But Rockport's was much larger because their gap narrowed to almost them being a minimum receiver again. So we lost a lot of the subsidy we lost was in Rockport, and then some of it was in Hope. This is the impact per $100,000 home value. The average home in Appleton will see $29.79 increase in their tax bill. Camden, $103.87. Hope, $66.28. Lincolnville, $67.25. And Rockport, $45.12. Other budget information. Our unassigned fund balance at the end of last year is estimated, we don't have our audit yet, to be $1.3 million. We're projecting it, that's supposed to say FY26 end right there, that slide. So I gotta, will you take note of that? That's supposed to say FY26 projected end. So at the end of this year, we're projecting it to be $2.1 million. Because it's as high as that, we can move money into the capital reserve. And that's what we're planning on doing. So we're projecting this year to end and the capital reserve to be at a really low amount, 168. Next year, we're projecting it to end at 713 because we're moving money in, and we're going to spend a little bit of money, but we're going to move a lot in.
Maria, just newbie question. The origin of the unassigned fund balance is budget that is unspent?
Basically, yes. Capital reserve, we'll have in a warrant article that will say, shall the school board be authorized to transfer up to $600,000 from unexpended balances to the capital reserve fund and expend up to $300,000. There's another mistake right there, Chris, $300,000 is missing a zero. From the said reserve fund to the capital items set forth below and for other unexpected and emergency needs. So we're planning to spend $135,000 from the capital reserve next year. $80,000 for the new income, $55,000 for a propane tank farm that's needed at the high school. We're asking to be able to spend up to $300,000 because there might be something that happens that we don't anticipate. So we always give ourselves a buffer there, but you know, we typically, sometimes we have to spend some of that money, but a lot of times we don't.
Is there another word we can use besides farm? Just sounds like we're gonna have like a field full of propane tanks.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna blow up.
I'm sure there is.
Cluster.
Array.
Right, there you go.
You also record.
Noted.
I apologize if this is actually, I don't remember hearing about the propane tank piece before. But, what's the need and where is it going to be located?
Chris might remember that better than I do.
So it's the HVAC upgrades that took place at the high school.
Okay.
Increased the need for propane tanks and need to pour a concrete slab. Current location is not going to change, but they need to be rested on concrete rather than on gravel or grass, and then have a fence around them. Protective
Near
barrier.
the greenhouse.
Yeah, okay. Thank
By
you.
the
They're
loading
Orient
dock.
people.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
We'll also have a warrant article that enables the district to expend up to $75,000 from the special ed reserve fund that already exists for unexpected private special ed placements. So that's just a sort of money in the bank we have in case we have an unexpected private placement. That just allows us to spend it if we need to. This article just allows us to spend other grants and other money that we might get in. We have to have a warrant article about our school nutrition program, and we're planning to raise $62,150. Last year it was $113,000 we needed. We need less money because we're getting more money in revenue from the federal government because we're serving more meals at the high school. This is an article that allows us, should we need to, make transfers among cost centers for amounts exceeding 5% of the total appropriation for any cost center. So that's if we need to do that. This just allows us to come to the board and the board votes on it. But we have to get voter approval to do it first. So we just always have this in here in case we need to do it. Adult ed budget is similar to what it's been in the past, some just small increases. But the total expense budget is up 3.96%. A lot of the expenses are covered in other ways other than taxpayer money. Enrichment and other things, but we'll get to that in a second. But so some other expenses, the expenses in the second part are covered by fees and grants. They're not covered by taxpayers. So about $90,000 of expenses are covered through other grants and things. So the total expense budget is $527,000, which is a 2.16% increase. And the amount from each town, which is based on the same share that is for the regular budget, are seen here. It's about a 1% increase. There's a larger increase in other revenues. And so again, our total revenues equal our total expenses, and we've taken out the things that are covered by other fees and grants. We've actually not gotten this state subsidy yet for the high school, so we put in the same thing we got last year, but they haven't given us the numbers yet for adult ed. So that's an estimate right now. And that is the budget. Are there questions?
Good job as usual.
Good job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got all that, Leanne?
Yes, I did. That was a great tutorial.
Again, you're right. All right, so this, just for the public's knowledge, next steps in terms of further presentations and dates that people should know about?
Yes. I wish that I had them in the top of my head, and I don't. The next,
Are they in people's binders?
we can check, but in March, at the March board meeting, we'll go over any changes to this requested budget. with the board. Probably will not do a full presentation, just talk about changes. April is when the board votes on the requested budget that will eventually go to taxpayers. We have a session for select boards in March, but I can't remember the date that that's going to be for all 5 towns. We will have a SAD and a CSD session for select boards. We have a public input meeting.
I think it's the 11th for the select boards.
Okay, so maybe March 11th for the select boards. And then our public input meeting is on May 11th for both districts. I think they're back to back. One is at 6, the SAD's at 6, and the other one is at 7. So that's in May, and then the referendum is in June.
If you have
Did you have
The referendum
that list
meeting?
of dates, can you just email that or have it emailed to us?
referendum vote?
Yep, I think Yep.
Budget meeting is in June? Where we
No,
meet?
the referendum, the vote is in June.
Yeah, at the poll, but.
The budget meeting's on May 11th.
May
I'll
11th.
send it to your board email right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, at one point I thought those were in board
I'll send
folders,
it,
but
I'll
I
send
don't
it
know
to
what happened
I'll
to
send
them.
it to the board emails.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, many opportunities to absorb this again and again and have input.
Oh, it's supposed to be in that board folder.